the steering committee meeting will be brief, but we don't actually need that much space for the steering committee meeting. So right now, the steering committee doesn't have a specific job to do per se, except oversight. Okay, we're not voting on updates to the standards. What's happening right now is that this meeting is where we can formally review what the community's done with our standards. And right now, what the community's doing, after a 2-year period of editing proposed draft updates to our standards, they're in a public comment period. And the public comment period is 6 months when people can see what's in a draft and they can send in notes, but these notes are constrained to typos and language issues. So in other words, there's this 6 months of relative quiet where people can say there's minor errors, or hypothetically, someone could say, in this draft, there's something catastrophically wrong, please go and stall. So for this reason, at this moment, in the middle of this period, there's not an action item for the steering committee, except to tell you where the public comment period is, so you have full awareness. The public comment period has had comments in, and none of those comments are significant per se. There have been quite a few language tweaks and adjustments. These are all tracked on GitHub. You can find them as pull requests. You can see the closed pull requests for comments that we closed, for example, in the early September meeting. The only item that may be of strategic concern at this juncture is that some of the language requests went into improving the language by changing the language quite a bit. And that's immediately outside of public comment period. That's an editing action. And that's been noted on the pull requests related to it. So in other words, there were some suggestions saying language could be improved by making these changes. And the community call said these changes are too big. That's not a tweak for clarity. That's a scope. That's a change of meaning. Those are flagged on the issues. Those are not going to be done in the public comment period. Those get pushed to future draft updates to the ISO standard. The little things that came up in that way suggested that the steering committee should be aware that we're coming back to the discussion of how prescriptive should we go. Okay, so the community keeps moving back into this conversation. It's not a new conversation. And as we noted earlier, based on our FAQ, we're limited to what and why, not how and when. In other words, we define have a process point. We don't say what's inside the process. But again and again, people raise the topic. Should we define more? Should we define more about process points? And we know the fundamental answer is that's not what we do, but it keeps coming up. So for this steering committee, the thought thing, the note from the public comment period is, after all these years, this topic keeps coming up. So the steering committee should probably think about, again, how do we clarify the board wishes that we're talking about what, not how. And we do this. We mentioned this on social media. We mentioned this before editing sessions. But we probably need to think about strategies and new avenues to continue emphasizing this, because clearly at least some parties that come to us are still confused that we don't do how in our standards. So that's really the message. That's what we're getting. It's not a big issue, but it keeps coming up. And we do say it on our website. We do talk through it before we edit any of our standards, et cetera, et cetera. But it keeps coming up. How prescriptive can we go? People are like, I have a good idea. We should clarify this. We should put in some details, blah, blah, blah. And as soon as someone says that, they're going into how. Here's how you should do it. One part of that is that maybe people don't read the FAQ. The other part is there's clearly market demand for more help. So it's something we need to think through as a steering committee.
Part was people don't read it. Oh.
As a first thought about this, so personally, I would really love to stick to the what and why, because we are different companies, we are in different perhaps technology fields acting. So we do have other processes than perhaps Hitachi or Ericsson or something like that. So I do not want to to enter in the scope of a standard into the how and when and so what we could think about is we have this possibility of use cases or descriptions how it might be implemented in a certain company or something like that, and we could think about let's say a contribution area where companies put in their way how they implement the standard, but we as a group, I would not go into the how and when.
So sort of case studies, maybe examples, but no recommendations.
Exactly. And even no, not making this as a standard. So you have to do that and that and so on. So there, I think the freedom to act is very important. We can provide here examples and use cases and such kind of thing, but not describe or mandate as a group or as a project. If you implement a compliance process, you have to do that and that and that with this kind of tool and so on and so on.
So we're touching on what the Japanese community said, more case studies, please. So increased reference material. And we are doing more case studies. We just did the IAB case study. We just did the engine case study. Maybe more of this type of material, but keeping it very clear that none of that is meant to be prescriptive. Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting that this question's coming up 7 years later.
Can I ask one question?
Yeah.
Simple question. I'm not sure how the older version be handled in after publish a new version. Just obsoleted or still alive?
Still alive.
Still alive.
Still alive. And I'm going to clarify, Joji-san raised a question about lifespan. I'm clarifying that. But in principle, from communication with JDF, a new version of the ISO standard just means that it'll be, say, 5230:2025. People can still use 5230:2020. And given our industries, we'd probably expect the old one to be in play for a very long time.
Forever.
Yeah.
And my understanding is public availability certificate and ISO probably expired 6 years.
I'm going to be working on clarifying that one. So I'm sending in a request to them to clarify this. I'm thinking that now when I spoke with our JDF mentor, he did not indicate that there's an expiry to ours, but I want to clarify, you see, there's more than one pass process. Mm-hmm. So the one we're specifically using is JTC1 pass transposition, the pass conversion process. You sent me a screenshot, and if you could send me the link, I'd appreciate it. I think the ISO publicly available specification you sent to me is perhaps a different one. It's not the JDC one past transposition. It's where they make a publicly available specification, which then has to transfer into an international standard. We went into a process to transfer, so I think it's a slightly different one, but confusingly named. I'll confirm that. But based on my previous discussion with JDF, there's no expiry on our ISO standards are just ISO standards. And in this case, it's just the year. On the ISO website, if you search 5230 and there's 2 versions, you'll get the new version in 2025, but there'll be a link to the old version. It'll have a note, this replaces blah, blah, and then you can go to the old version and use it. But, I would be surprised if there's no expiry to our ones, and as I understand it, there isn't. I'd be surprised if our current ISO standard was not still being used in 2030. You know, the new one will be adopted by some parties in some supply chains. In automotive or industrial, they'll probably stick with the original one for a long time. Many of our companies are just starting to use. In principle, we said we'd update the standards at least around every 5 years, in principle. And that's based on trying to keep them fresh with the market changes, but it should not, the intent was never that it mandates that everyone has to upgrade. Because it's not a software approach, but very much here's an option approach. All right. Any further items? If not,
No.
end of song. Don't add something. Okay. It's back to Jimmy.
Yes. So for all of those that could join us here in now very sunny Vienna, I know a lot of people had trouble getting in because it was not so sunny over the weekend. Thank you very much for being here with us. It's been a great week for many of us, I think. We had some good conversations. We had a fantastic dinner last night, those who joined us. And we had a fantastic board meeting. We are almost on time. We are never almost on time.
That's not true.
Usually we're over by more than this. So this was very well done, Shane. Because we have a very talkative board that likes to discuss and deep dive into things. And I think that's something we should cherish and bring with us, that we can have good discussions, both over dinner as last night and around the table like this. And we had now the steering committee meeting as well, which, as you noted, are basically some of the same individuals. But for you that are on the phone, sad that you're not here with us. It would have been even more fun. But very happy to have you. I know some of you are up very late or even very early. So thank you for participating, both as those of you that observed the board meeting and now for the steering committee meeting. So again, thank you all. I'm looking forward to seeing you all again the next time the happenstance brings us together. Hopefully in Napa, if not in Napa, then in Japan. I will certainly be at both those events. So with that, if someone would like to give me a motion to close this meeting. Hello?
Yeah.
Great. And can we get a second?
Second.
Excellent. You're all very well dressed. I didn't ask for a second one. Good. So with that, anyone all in favor of closing the meeting? Say aye.
Aye.
Is there anyone objecting to us closing the meeting?
No one dares.
No one dares.